Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillahi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, my dear brothers and sisters. My sincere apologies if you are joining in on Zoom for the delay, and on Facebook if you've been waiting for the delay. We had a bit of technical issues, but alhamdulillah, we're here. My name is Brother Dean. I am the moderator or host for today. Welcome to the Muslim Circle daily reminder all throughout Ramadan, inshallah. If you're new to the Muslim Circle daily tazkirah, as I mentioned, this is happening daily at 9:30 p.m. Malaysia time, that's plus 8 GMT. And every day we were having a speaker talking about numerous things, and the speakers are from all over the world. Some are from Malaysia, from Canada, from US, and so on and so forth, right? Alhamdulillah, thank you so much for joining. Again, my apologies for the delay. With us today, we have Sister Saba Syed, also known as Reem. She will be talking about Islam, culture, and misogyny. All right. So just a brief introduction about Sister Saba. She is the author of the international award-winning novel An Acquaintance. She has a bachelor's degree in Islamic studies. She studied Arabic language and literature at the Qatar University and at the Cairo Institute in Egypt, mashallah. And she also received her ijaza in Quranic Hafs recitation in Egypt from Sheikh Muhammad Al-Hamazawi, if I pronounced that correctly. She had been actively involved with the Islamic community since 1995, mashallah, and she is also the founding member of a number of community organizations. In 2002, she organized and hosted the very first Muslim Women's Conference in Houston, Texas, mashallah. Since then, she's been passionately working on empowering Muslim women through the correct and untainted teachings of Islam. She's also a counselor for marriage and family, women and youth issues. She has hosted several Islamic lectures and weekly halaqas in different communities all over the US and worldwide. She has also hosted several workshops regarding parenting, Islamic sexual education, female sexuality, and marital intimacy. So once again, please, I pass the floor on to Sister Saba. Fadal.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah khair for having me over. Inshallah, I think without further delay, I will start, and then inshallah we will take the question and answer, inshallah. So, Bismillah, inna alhamdulillahi nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruh wa na'udhu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina. Man yahdihillahu fala mudilla lahu wa man yudlilhu fala hadiya lahu wa ashhadu an la ilaha illallah وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله. Today's topic is Islam, culture, and misogyny. It's a very wide topic, and it has it actually requires quite a few discussions before we can actually understand the topic itself, the misunderstandings associated to it, and the whole, the dilemma of whether or not Islam has misogynistic rulings or it is biased against women, or there are requirements in the religion that may not be very favorable to women. So what is misogyny? Misogyny, by definition, is a cultural attitude of hatred for females simply because they are females. And what does that hatred mean? Basically, it's that hatred is manifested in different ways. So primarily, it will include social exclusion or sex discrimination, hostility towards women, androcentrism, patriarchy, male privileges, violence against women, or sexual objectification of women, and etc. So why does Islam get the reputation, or why is Islam misunderstood as a promoter of misogyny. Now, for those of us who are born into this faith, or who have reverted to Islam, and we practice Islam as we study it and as we understand it, and it's a major part of our life. When we hear these terms, when we read these, how misogyny is manifested, the term, the some of the ways that I mentioned just right now, and then we look at our lifestyle and we reflect on the Islamic teachings, especially the Quran and the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or our Prophet's lifestyle, or how he treated women, or the people around him. And then we look at these numerous ways how misogyny is manifested. It just is, we don't understand, we don't see Islam fitting in any of these ways. We don't see Islamic education promoting any of these, the androcentrism or violence against women or objectifications. In fact, we understand that these are the very practices Islam has eliminated even 1400 years ago, and it has been working since then to remove these practices, these injustices from the society. But still, we see that on a far majority in part of the world, there is Islam has this reputation as being misogynistic. And I'm going to be honest with you, there is no black and white answer as to why Islam has gotten that reputation. And I can't really highlight all the reasons why in just one talk, but I've tried to pull out the two major reasons, and then, like their subcategories that inshallah we can just briefly cover today, just to get an idea where that connection gets misunderstood, or how people somehow, misunderstand or even, give Islam that kind of reputation. So moving along, the first reason, the aspect, or the first thing that we're going to consider in today is the culture of many Muslim countries, or the so-called Muslim countries, but the culture of Muslim countries. And the second reason is the misogynistic interpretation of Islamic texts. So let's look at the first reason, which is the culture of Muslim countries. We are living in a society, I think for past few years, that is basically a globalized culture. So anything that happens anywhere, it gets known everywhere. So if some incident takes place in a remote village of Pakistan, it gets known everywhere because of the internet, because of the global culture, because of, how fast the news travel in our times, and how people have access to post anything, wherever it's happening. So whatever happens in any part of the world, it's a spread out. And people are not familiar with the fact that there is the culture and then there's the religion. So if anything is happening in a place where women are covered, or men have long, beards, or they're dressed in a certain way which looks, Islamic, they associate that immediately to the religion, to Islam, especially when a woman is covered. So say if even in India, if something happens which probably is not even among Muslims, but the women cover, because from like in the cultural practice in their villages or something, women still cover pretty similar to Muslim women, or their heads are covered. It just gets associated to Islam. Oh, this is happening among Muslims. And it's not that it doesn't happen among Muslims. Of course, unfortunately, a lot of these misogynistic practices take place among Muslims due to their culture, not because of the religion. Um, in fact, people who live, for instance, you know, in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, or in the Middle East, or in, you know, the other Arab countries, or in the countries that are Muslim countries, but the culture is the dominant factor of running people's lives. They themselves cannot differentiate between their culture and their religion most of the time. And that one of the reasons why is, again, the lack of religious knowledge, which, you know, inshallah, we will get to in a few seconds. In the eastern part of the world, which I have noticed because I've lived both in the West and the East, and I travel a lot. So I have noticed this thing that in eastern part of the world, religion is an integral part at a communal level. So people have a lot of respect for the religion, a lot of submission towards the religion, whether they have the knowledge or not. And I just want to highlight here that by human nature, unfortunately, it's something that among humans is to try to dominate others around them, to have the control. You know, the humans they want or they like to control by nature. And this also, you know, seeps into you know, men on male and female relationship, and or also when people do want to be religious. A lot of times it just becomes a tool in their hands. So men like to, you know, obviously they like to dominate women, and they have this in the patriarchal society, and in general, they have this power and the authority to be able to dominate women. Plus, if they can use religion as a manipulation tool, they don't shy away from that. They actually use it to enforce their own beliefs or their own desire to be able to remain in control. Plus, if a person, when far majority of the time people don't have the right correct religious knowledge, which unfortunately is the case in a lot of Muslim countries, Islam ends up being used as a manipulation tool, as a tool to control women by men, just because they can do it. Because first of all, women are not as educated about their religion, and also because they are just not as, they don't have as much authority and power in the society. So to be specific, for instance, you know, I was just touring a couple months ago. I was in Pakistan. I'm actually writing a book on the specific issue, so I had to do some research. I was there just because I wanted to, you know, see in person some of these things that happen that we hear about. And there's a lot of these things that people don't want to prove culturally. They somehow try to look for an excuse religiously, and then they enforce it as a religious belief. For instance, culturally, you know, the idea of a divorced woman not being very, I don't know, not having a very positive, what do you call, that this is not a very good thing for women to be divorced. It comes from a cultural belief rooted when India and Pakistan were together, because in the religion of Hinduism, there was no divorce. And, you know, this was not, it didn't even exist in their religion. But it did among Muslims, because Islam gave the right to both men and women. If they're not happy in a marriage, then they can separate their ways and, you know, move on and live a life of contentment and happiness, because that is the idea of marriage. But Muslims adopted that idea from Hinduism, that no, this is a negative thing, this is a wrong, you know, bad thing, in fact, for women to be divorced specifically. And then they somehow seep that into the religious beliefs that no, you know, this is not encouraged. This is not a right thing to do. This is not something that is Islamically acceptable. They even go to that extent. And unfortunately, there are a lot of, even a person who can just simply read Quran in the local mosques in the villages or in the small towns, and sometimes even in the major cities, but in suburban areas, who can barely just read Quran, gets the authority to be able to speak on behalf of Islam, to give the rulings, to give interpretations of Quran. And they're not educated in Islam, but because they're getting that position of power, that place of authority, they just somehow, and unfortunately again, end up abusing that power, and they speak on the rulings of Islam without actually any educational background. And I am not, this is unfortunate. I'm not happy. This is, it's actually very sad that I have to highlight this, but unfortunately it is happening so much that it is actually turning people away from the religion on many levels, because of course when somebody speaks on behalf of Islam without any knowledge, then not a very positive message comes out, and so on and so forth. So there are many cultural beliefs that get mixed up with the religion, and or religion is used to enforce those cultural beliefs. Unfortunately, another example is, unfortunately, like the preference of boys over girls, which I don't know where it started from, but it still exists to this day. I know that for some of, the audience, especially in the West, it might be difficult to even imagine that, but unfortunately it still happens. And the way some of the people would justify it, they would go that far as quoting Quran from, in Surah Kahf, there's an ayah, al-malu wal-banuna zinatul hayat ad-dunya, which means that the money and the banun, which literally would translate to sons. But again, people, when they don't have knowledge, they would just take that term as is, that these are the luxuries of life, or these are the zina of this life. And they would justify it that, look, even in Quran, the sons have been preferred over girls. So that's one of their own desire, their own preference, their own belief, for whatever reason that they prefer to have, they have more desire to have sons over girls. But then they take that and then they enforce their belief, they justify their wrong belief, by misquoting a verse from Quran. And the list goes, there's so many examples that I can quote right now, but fortunately I have to move on because of I don't have enough time. But all these cultural beliefs that we see, all these misogynistic ways that we see, which I have quoted before, domestic violence, or male privileges, or social exclusion, where there are far more restrictions on girls for the same things than boys. Like, boys have a lot more social freedom than the girls. These are not these are not Islamic practices. These are cultural practices. Or sex discrimination, giving more to boys than the girls. These are all cultural practices. But because in Islamic countries there is a more respect and submission towards the religion, it's very easy to use religion to back up those social injustices. And especially when people don't have enough knowledge about their religion, it's very easy to misguide the people, and especially the women, by misquoting the textual the text from the Quran or the Hadith or the practices of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The other thing that I mentioned was the misogynistic interpretations. So in this, the misogynistic interpretations, I am going to actually mention three things. The misogynistic interpretations of the Quran and the ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Now, there are three pretty much subcategories. So the firstly is where the text, the Islamic text, is actually interpreted, misogynistically. The second is where it's misunderstood as a misogynistic interpretation, but it is actually not a misogynistic interpretation. And the third thing that I would mention is the lack of female participation and involvement in understanding the text, which is specifically related to females. So what I mean by misogynistic interpretations of the Quran and Sunnah, for instance, and again, there are many examples, when certain verses from Quran or certain hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ are taken out of context, or they're given a very biased sort of explanation, which apparently puts women down or puts them at a lower level, or gives them sort of, it excludes them, or in a not a very positive way. For example, the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where it's mentioned that, there's not a bigger fitna that I am leaving behind for men. And he says, like, the women are the biggest, basically, fitna that he's leaving behind for men. The interpretation of this hadith has been very negative towards women. And it has been used also. So people would take it, misquote it, men would abuse this hadith just to win the argument or put the woman down, and again, to dominate their partner, or, their woman folk, whether it's their daughters, wives, sisters, whoever it may be. So this hadith, it's a sahih hadith, but when the interpretation is given, the people who explain it, the people who talk about this from a level of authority, unfortunately, they don't realize the effect of their words or what they're saying or what they're preaching. A lot of times, these kind of terms, these kind of hadiths need a lot more explanation if they actually are thinking about not hurting a certain group of Muslims. And women is, a huge group of Muslims. So fitna is not a bad thing in of itself. Fitna could be good, fitna could be bad. Fitna just means something that we are tested with. And women are not the only thing that are mentioned as fitna. So our money has been mentioned in fitna, and in fact, that has been mentioned in the Quran. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that your children and your money is a fitna for you. Does that make money inherently evil or bad when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala referred to money as fitna? No, it's not, because on other places, money has been referred as a blessing from Allah. Are children inherently evil or bad because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has called them a fitna? No, we would never hear any talk or any interpretation where money or children are giving any kind of negative connotation just because they have been referred to as a fitna. But when it comes to that particular hadith that, women are fitna, the general idea and, majority of the explanations always have this kind of like a negative connotation towards women, negative vibe towards women, that somehow they are evil, or they're not evil. Evil is a strong term, but they may not be, something not positive, something not good about them, which makes them fitna. But when it comes to other things, they are never explained in that way. And unfortunately, you know, I am ashamed to say this, that these kind of interpretations do exist amongst Muslims, you know, where the people who are explaining these ahadith do not understand the severity of the damage that their words or their explanation could cause if they're not very, very careful with that. Because there is already, you know, coming from the culture of far majority of Muslim countries, there's already a patriarchal, you know, the patriarchy already exists there because of the cultural reasons. And then Islam has to be the tool to wipe that out from the cultures, from people's societies, from our communities. So the interpretations have to be very, very, they must be done very carefully, keeping that in mind, that there is a strong cultural belief, you know, there's pretty much all over the world where patriarchy is very, very common. And this does not generate from Islam or Islamic beliefs. So going back to that hadith that, you know, women are fitna, there are so many other places where the Prophet ﷺ again and again and again reminded men to be mindful of how they treat their women. In fact, the last khutbah of the Prophet ﷺ was, you know, a good part of his khutbah was about women and the treatment towards women, and a warning to men to be mindful of their treatment towards their women folk. How many times, you know, we don't hear that, especially when it's coming to the interpretation of ahadith like this, that, you know, women are fitna, taking everything into context and then explaining the words of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because this particular hadith have been, you know, abused, misused, misquoted, you know, to justify domestic violence against women, you know, how fathers treat their daughters, how husbands treat their wives, or, you know, sons treat their mothers. When because of the misinterpretation of the ahadith, the oppression towards women have taken place in the name of Islam because the interpretation was not done rightly. And the people who gave the interpretation did not take their time to make sure that those words are not misunderstood and those words are not explained in, you know, not enforcing, but basically giving a room for any misogynistic practices to take place. Similarly, another example of this when it comes to the misogynistic interpretations is you know, the talk or the basically, you know, the interpretation of the hurs in Jannah. Now, the hur, you know, hur al-ain are obviously true. They exist. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned them in the Quran. They have been, you know, they are a reward for men. And you know, there's no denying of that. But when the speeches are delivered in such a way where there's this exclusiveness of just men, leaving women behind, when the interpretations are done, when the speeches are delivered in such a way that gives men, you know, that place, that sort of attitude, that sort of power that, oh, we have been preferred not only in the world, but also, you know, in hereafter because our rewards are more, or, you know, giving that kind of sort of tool or sort of backing to men, and not taking everything that has been mentioned and making like a balance in the explanation of those verses, that causes damage. Um, that is basically giving or misinterpreting or basically abusing some of the rewards to exclude the females and a major group of Muslims. They feel left out. The women feel left out, especially in the way these speeches are delivered, when they're only targeting men, when they're only catering towards men. That Jannah is basically giving the impression that Jannah is all male-centric and it is all about the rewards for men. Hurs, to be honest, are just another reward in Jannah. There are so many things, there are so many rewards and ni'mas and blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Jannah that could be included in that particular lecture that is being delivered. But unfortunately, this has become, like what sells, basically, what would attract the audience when it's mentioned. And, this will obviously attract the men. This will obviously give them a lot more, feeling of being more powerful or being more dominating or even being preferred. But that's not the language of Islam. That's not the message of Islam. We see that the amount of times it's been mentioned in Quran, the reward of hur, and the so many other rewards that have been mentioned in Quran. When we deliver the message of Quran especially from the place and the position of authority and power, we have to keep in mind that our message has to be balanced. There are men and there are women believers. And when we're delivering, especially the reward of Jannah, it has to be balanced. And this is not something, a'udhu billah, so many times I've heard, when this specific topic has come up, I've heard so many times people saying, oh, you know what, the women have to have strong faith, they need to have strong belief, this is mentioned in Quran, what do you want us to do, not quote Quranic ayahs? No, this is not what's being said. What's being said is balance it out. Don't make Islam sound like male-centric, because that is not what Islam is. But when we are delivering a message to people who don't know the Islamic message, they have not read Quran with meanings, they don't even know what the from Surah Fatiha to Surah Nas, they don't have the time, don't have the understanding, don't have the means to know the entire message of Quran. And then when they take time out to listen to one or few talks, and it's all male-centric, it's all about men's rewards, then what message are those people going to get? Men and women. Men are going to think, oh, our religion is male-centric, and women are going to think, oh, what is there for me? And this is not something that only happens to women of our time who are supposedly not as have strong faith. A'udhu billah, of course this is not true. It even happened during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when women felt left out, and they went to the Prophet ﷺ and they complained to the Prophet that we feel left out when the rewards are mentioned, because the language of the Quran is that in Arabic language, when they're both genders are included, men and women, then the pronoun takes the male pronoun, but that doesn't mean that it's only for men. It also means that women are also included, which is a different tangent. I don't want to get into it. But what was the reply of the Prophet ﷺ? That no, you need to strengthen your belief. No, that you need to, you don't have enough iman in your heart. No, immediately, subhanallah, and it just, this is the message of Islam, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala heard the complaint of women that they feel left out, and He sent the ayahs where He specifically mentioned the reward for the Muslim men and for the Muslim women, for the believing men and for the believing women, for the fasting men and for the fasting women. This is the message of Islam. That when women felt left out, subhanallah, it was heard over the, above the seventh sky, over the arsh, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent revealed ayahs to comfort His female servants, to comfort them, to bring peace to their heart, to give them a surety that no, your reward is equal to the men and you are not any less than men. This is Islam. This is the message of Islam. But unfortunately, when it's delivered in the lectures, in the khutbahs, in the articles, in the books, it's not balanced. It's not balanced as it's supposed to be. In fact, the text that could have that has terms that need more explanation so as not to cause that misunderstanding that Islam is misogynist, our writers, our speakers, our scholars don't take the time out to go in depth and to give that explanation and to create that balance, unfortunately. And until we start doing this, until we start taking that time, Islam will continue to get this misrepresentation, this reputation that, it's misogynist. And it's our job to make sure that the balance that Islam has created, that we make sure that that balance is also implemented and manifested in our talks, in our lectures. Now, moving along to the second point, the text, the Quranic verses and ahadith that are not misogynistic, but they are misunderstood as misogynistic because of, for instance, I will go into the example, for instance, the law of inheritance, for instance. The law of inheritance is that the daughters get half of the amount of the sons, or the wives get less than, if the husband dies, the wife gets less of the ratio of the property, versus when the woman dies, when the wife dies, and what husband gets. Is it misogyny? Is it a preference of men? This is how it's always coded, in fact, a'udhu billah, in culturally, in some of the places that I mentioned, remember the first point I said, that the culture of the Muslim countries, unfortunately, when they want to justify their love more for their sons, or their preference over sons, I have heard this, they're saying, oh, even Allah prefers men over women, because look, the inheritance, boys are preferred over girls. But that's not true. Is that preference? Now, if you go and study the whole law of inheritance, if you study the whole the Islamic system of how the responsibilities are distributed among men and women, when after all of that is put in perspective, the end result, the conclusion would be that no, the law of inheritance is one of the most fair and just law in the world. How so? Let me explain. Islam has a complete way of life. It has a system. It has division of responsibilities. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not put financial responsibility on women under any circumstances. Doesn't mean that they're not allowed to work, or they can't practice what they have studied. No, it means they don't have the responsibility of financially supporting their family or themselves. They are either their father's responsibility financially, or their husband's responsibility, or their brother's responsibility, but they're always the responsibility of providing money and financial support has always been placed on a man in Islam. And even so much so that if she's left without any male support from the family, then if they're supposed to be like a Muslim government, then she becomes the government's responsibility to get that financial support. So subhanallah, Allah has not placed that financial responsibility on women. When that is implemented, when that is enforced, then to get half of the inheritance money is actually a privilege. because she does not have any financial responsibility. If the father dies, the financial responsibility of the entire family goes to the son. The son is supposed to support his mother, his sisters, and whoever is under that household. So he needs that money to support. She doesn't. He needs whatever money he is getting from the inheritance is actually being used to support the whole household, his own wife, his own mother, his own sisters, and whoever, so on and so forth. But whatever she is getting is just her money, like, her pocket change. It's just her allowance, an extra thing. She's not supposed to use that money to buy groceries or to buy food or household, the other necessities in the household. No, that's for her own personal use. So to even get that money is actually a privilege. But when it's explained like this, and it's not, I'm not making this up, when that system is implemented, then that money obviously is a privilege for her. And the money that the boy is getting is part of his responsibility of taking care of his household. Is that misogyny? Is that unfair? Does that give any room to say that Islam prefers men over women, or Islam gives less to women than men? I think it's just the opposite. Islam is actually giving her a privilege. She doesn't even need that. Whatever money she gets from her inheritance is hers, while her brother would still have to pay for her food, for her, house, for where she's living, for her education, whatever. It's still her brother's responsibility who will be taking care of her. Or if she's married, then it's her husband's responsibility who will be taking care of her. And the inheritance money that she has inherited is just it's just, extra money for her. So I will leave it up to you guys to think about it. Does that mean that Islam prefers men, or that this is a misogynist ruling for women to get half of men? Similarly, when it comes to hijab, it's one of the most controversial practice all over the world. And I don't want to get too much into it. I think I'm running out of time, but basically the implementation, it's not a suppression. Hijab is not a suppression because it's an act of worship. And the reason women are supposed to wear hijab is because Allah has asked us to do so. It's an act of worship. It's an act of obedience towards Allah. Men has nothing to do with it. But when, unfortunately, it gets misunderstood as misogynist, because in a lot of places, and again, especially among Muslim countries, the implementations and the execution is not because of the deen. It's part of the culture to somehow, I don't even know how it originated, that woman has to be covered, even from a non-Islamic perspective, from a non-religious perspective. And the reason I can say this is, as I said, I have lived in Muslim countries as well, and I have seen that happening, that it's not because of the religion. Those girls may not pray. They will not fast. They probably don't even know how to read Quran, but they are required to cover themselves because somehow it's the family's honor, family's respect, family's reputation depend on how much their girls are covered. So this is what I meant by when some of the text or some of the rulings are misunderstood as misogynist, but in reality they are not, simply because we don't know the whole context around that ruling, the whole background and the reasoning of the ruling, that why they are the way they are, like the law of inheritance. But when we study and when we empower ourselves with the education of Islam, then we are able to understand it better, that no, this is not, even though it seems like it, but deep down it's not. And then the last point that I'm going to mention is the lack of female participation and female inclusiveness. So the reason I say participation and inclusiveness separately is because there are basically two subcategories in this: is lack of female participation, especially in understanding the texts that are related to Muslim women, that require a like an opinion or a input from a female, but when the interpretation is happening, those are not sought. The female opinions or the female feedback is not taken into context. Sometimes it happens because unfortunately my sisters are just not as interested, or they just don't see the need or the necessity, or for whatever reason, maybe they're too shy, that they don't speak up, that no, or they don't ask enough questions to have that explanation, or to reconsider that why XYZ explanation is given. And the other times is our the respected shuyukh or the respected interpreters, they don't take the input, the feedback of females where they should be taking it, especially when the verses or the fatwas or the issues are related to women, where they need to be consulted to have a fair explanation or interpretation, to be given a fair explanation. And I'll give you an example is, this is a part of the Sunnah, this is a part of the Sunnah of our Sahaba as well. When during the time of Umar radiallahu anh, when there were, a lot of time the men had to leave because there was like a lot of defense, and a lot of men were needed in the army. And so they would leave for a long period of time because the Muslim, the territories were expanding, and the travel used to take long time back then because they would be traveling on the camels or on the horses. So the men would leave for a long time. And then Umar radiallahu anhu, I'm sure you guys must be familiar with this incident, once he heard a woman complain about how she is sexually frustrated because her husband has been gone for such a long time, he was a soldier in the army, and that she was at the verge of, doing something haram. And then Umar radiallahu anhu, he didn't like this, obviously, because it was unfair on the woman to be left alone without their husbands for such a long time, because they have needs also. So he went to his daughter and he asked her this specific question, that how long a woman can live without her husband, without being sexually satisfied. And then, his daughter answered the question, for so-and-so, like for 4 months or whatever, which was applicable during that time. The point is that when it was related to women, when it was an issue about women, Umar radiallahu anh consulted a woman to give a proper ruling. And then he made it mandatory for the soldiers to return every 4 months and, be with their wives. And this is a classic example of how, when the issues are about women, that women need to be consulted. They should be asked. Their input should be there, so that a fair ruling could be implemented. In our times, unfortunately, there are a lot of issues related to women, and they're not consulted many times, and hence, when the ruling or when the verdict is given, it does not sound fair. In fact, I myself ended up writing something long time ago, almost, I'm gonna say about 15 years ago. I wrote an article about whether or not female vaginal discharge is impure, if it breaks wudu or it doesn't break wudu, because this was one of those issues that every time I read an article, every time I read a book, it is usually written by men, it was all that it breaks wudu, and you can read that article. It's available on muslimmatters.org. I went into thorough study because, you know, Islam is not meant to cause difficulties. It actually, you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that we meant ease for you. We don't mean difficulty for you. So taking a lot of things into perspective, and I interviewed a lot of women, you know, just a regular woman and the woman of knowledge. And then I had like a thorough conclusion over this, that it doesn't break wudu. But this is one of those issues, for, you know, this is one of the examples, is when these things are addressed, and it's usually our, you know, male people of knowledge who are writing or giving or delivering the speech, then there is a necessity to consult women. There's a necessity, there's a need. It must be that the woman should be consulted, and there should be, their feedback should be taken, because then and only then we can come up with a fair conclusion. So these are just some of those issues that I feel like give room to cause the misunderstanding that Islam, you know, is a promoter of misogyny. And, you know, inshallah, as we move along and we start taking care of these things, and we start, you know, strongly discriminating and distinguishing between the first and foremost culture, even if it's so-called Muslim countries' culture, doesn't mean that it represents Islam. And we will have to be very outspoken and vocal about it, because not only it causes misunderstanding, you know, for non-Muslims, it even causes misunderstandings for Muslims. A lot of people are shaky about their faith, especially women, because of this whole cultural misogyny that takes place in the name of Islam. And then these other things that I mentioned that, you know, unfortunately even happens, you know, among the people of knowledge, you know, unintentionally, inshallah, but it ends up happening where we don't take time out to make sure that when we are delivering something, that it's balanced, and that the other things which could be misunderstood as misogyny, you know, whether it be hijab or the laws of inheritance or other things, that they're not delivered in a way, you know, reinstating the misogynist attitude. And inshallah that, you know, we have a lot more participation from females, that they come out from their comfort zone. And I am seeing that this is already happening, inshallah, but also from our, you know, male people of knowledge, male shuyukh, male scholars, that they be more inclusive of the females, that inshallah we can, you know, clarify, and we can, what do you call this, misunderstanding that Islam is a promoter of misogyny, that we can clarify that, inshallah. And that's all I have to say. If there are any questions, please go ahead, and we can take the questions now.
MashaAllah, Jazakallah khair, Sister Saba. That was very enlightening, alhamdulillah. That was very informative. As you were talking, I keep being reminded that we need more. This is why we need more female scholars or female speakers and teachers in the public circuit, because, as you rightly said, there's a lot that insight that is coming from the mashayikh, the sheikhs, and the speakers, the male speakers, which is no disrespect to them. Of course, that's what we need, but obviously we need more women on the circuit, as we say, because we need that different perspective on certain topics, especially. So yeah, to our dear viewers, brothers and sisters, if you just joined in, or you joined in halfway, welcome to the Muslim Circle online webinar that is happening daily. With us today, we have Sister Saba again. We do have a few questions. I hope you don't mind, Sister, if we spend maybe about 10 minutes or so answering about 3 or 4 questions. Yeah, okay. So if our viewers have more questions, do send them over. You can send them on Zoom if If you are on Zoom right now, you can click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and ask your question, or you can also post a comment on our Facebook. We are also live on Facebook right now. Post the questions on the comment and I will read it out, inshallah. So the first one, it's more, you know, in the beginning of your talk, you mentioned about fitna and how when something is mentioned as a fitna in the Quran or in a hadith, it doesn't mean that that thing is inherently evil. Whether it be women, whether it be wealth or children, etc. So then on the personal level, how do we as individuals know when we're presented with a test from Allah that how do we know that this test, this fitna is a test from Allah, to say the least, and how do we, a test from Allah, and how do we know that it's a punishment or something more negative that is coming from Allah? So how do we differentiate that? I wonder if you can have a reflection on that.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. You know, and subhanallah, and that's just the raham or the karam, the mercy of Allah, that even in his punishment there is blessing. So, you know, even if we're being punished for something, we can, with our patience, with our steadfastness, we can turn that into a blessing. So for instance, if we are tested with poverty, with the lack of money, which is a test, it is a shackle, you know, it is a difficulty, it's a burden, but with the patience and with perseverance and with the gratitude, even that difficulty can turn into blessing, you know, of how much reward we would be getting from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because of how we are acting in the face of that trial. So to say, I don't know whether we can ever distinguish whether it's a punishment or a trial from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because the whole idea of, you know, punishing in the world is to remove those wrongs or the sins that we have earned, right? So even though it may be a punishment, it's an opportunity to get rid of the sins and to earn a reward. So is it always just a punishment to punish for the sake of punishing? Allahu alam, I don't think so, because, you know, this is one of the mercies of Allah, that even in his punishments there are blessings, because that punishment is basically being given to us. He's actually giving us, chosen us to give us that opportunity to, here is your opportunity, get rid of, you know, XYZ sins that you have committed in the past. So that can actually become a blessing. As far as this fitna part, that, you know, the woman, the money, the lack of money or the abundance of money, both are fitna, because the abundance of money can take us away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So even though it may be a blessing, people would look at it as a blessing, it doesn't remain a blessing for us anymore. If it's keeping us away from Allah, if we are, you know, mistreating people, become proud or arrogant because of that, then that, what seems like a blessing is actually, you know, a punishment, basically, because it's taking us away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if in our love, you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might bless us with beautiful, you know, smart, intelligent children, but if we become arrogant because of them, or if we take, if we let that love, you know, take us away from the deen, or not give them proper Islamic upbringing, then that in itself becomes, you know, a punishment, for the lack of a better term, you know, because it's taking us away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So is there ever a clear distinguishing between a punishment and a blessing? I don't know. I don't think so. I think because every punishment can be turned into a blessing, and a blessing can become a punishment depending on how we are acting and how we are receiving that. Yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Excellent. Yeah, Jazakallah khair. Appreciate that. Okay, so let's get to, oh, wow, okay. A few more coming in, alhamdulillah. Okay, Jalila Abbasi asks, Assalamu alaikum. Regarding the inheritance, I completely understand the rule and agree with it, but nowadays in the Western countries, there is no, I think she meant here, pressure on the men to take care of the ladies in the house. So basically, men get their shares but don't take any responsibilities. So can you comment on that, please?
Yes, unfortunately, it is true, and I think that's where the people of knowledge, the shuyukh, and the speeches and the talks come into place. Is the Western culture may be like that, but Islam is not. Islam has placed certain responsibilities on men. Islam has placed certain responsibilities on women, and again, the balance that I was talking about. This is where I have. I respect all the male shuyukh, they're my teachers, but sometimes, everybody makes a mistake, that lack of balance, that when it comes to mentioning hurs or, the rewards or the rights of men, we have plenty. But when it comes to what responsibilities they have, we don't have as much. So, this message, this is an Islamic responsibility. This is an Islamic duty on men to support their wives, and it should be delivered in our masajid, and our Muslim website, in our articles, in the speeches, to remind them that yes, the culture may not put that responsibility on them, especially with all the rise of feminism, that women would work and they would support themselves and all that. But the responsibility, the financial responsibility, still remains on the men, and that need to be reminded again and again from an Islamic perspective.
Okay. Jazakallah khair. Next one. How to balance your role as a wife and your personal ambition, i.e. your career? I guess this is somewhat of a question.
It's a very broad question. I don't know, how you can do this, but I know, I myself have done it, and I know a lot of sisters who do it. It's not impossible. It's possible. And, but again, has to be a balance. You take care of your responsibilities, you give and take. Marriage is all about give and take. It's not one way. It's a two-way street. So yes, that's how, husband will have to obviously play a role in this, be more understanding, understand that, wife has ambition, she has dreams, and, he will have to make certain sacrifices, and she will have to make certain sacrifices. It has to be balanced with kindness, with understanding, with, communication. And it's a give and take. So she will have to sacrifice at some places, and he will have to sacrifice at some places. And I think it can be balanced as long as there's good communication, as long as there's love and understanding in the marriage. I think it can be easily balanced, inshallah.
Inshallah, yes. The key is balance. Okay. Why do you think there is a lack of female teachers in the public circuit, and how can we address this?
I don't know. It's something that has not been implemented in, for decades now. So to revive that sunnah, to revive that practice, it will take some time. Now I'm looking at, when I started getting involved in 1995, there was no female participation, to be honest. Even the females who were educated, as being myself one of them, we were not given ever any platform to speak anywhere, and even if in some conferences we were given any platform, it would only be to address just a very small circle of females only. So I would say in past 20 years, it has changed, alhamdulillah. It has improved, not as much as it should have been, but it has improved. And inshallah, if we just continue to hold talks like this, as you, mashallah, arranged, and in other places, then we will inshallah be able to create a balance. It's going to take time because, as I said, it was decades of lack of participation and lack of inclusiveness, for cultural reasons. Again, I'm going to blame it on the culture because it is what it is. It's not from the religion. From the religion of Islam, we see that the females were always actively involved, equally involved. Aisha radiallahu anha, she's one of the major teachers. If it wasn't for her, we wouldn't have more than half of Islam with us right now. And men did not feel any kind of hesitation or shame from going and studying with her. In fact, they would be proud that their teacher was Aisha radiallahu anha. And after that, there have been many, many, many female scholars who have educated, many, many male scholars. But somehow, again, overall, the world, overall, by nature, humans have the need, the desire to dominate, to control, and hence the patriarchy is an overall characteristic of the world. But it's not Islam. Islam actually came to eliminate that. Islam actually came to create the balance. So we can't give in to the patriarchy. And unfortunately, what we have started doing is enforcing it in the name of Islam. There's been like very, not just imbalance, but like totally opposite of that. So it's going to take time, and alhamdulillah, it is improving. And as I said, the females also need to come out from their comfort zone. And as a woman myself, I can tell you that sometimes we have to fight our way in, unfortunately. Sometimes we as female speakers, and I'm sure the other female scholars, sometimes we have to fight our way in. And it's not, a lot of time it's not because of the position or the power or anything. It's just to get the right message across. But inshallah, with brothers like you and organizations like yourself and other organizations that we have in the US, inshallah, we will continue to make the change.
Inshallah,
slowly,
inshallah.
but surely, inshallah.
On that note, then, can you maybe, to someone ask this question as well, like as a person who speaks out and addresses issues publicly, what are some of the challenges that you faced in your time as a speaker?
Many challenges, to be honest. There have been days where I just wanted to quit, not do anything. I'm gonna say I started writing on these issues back in 2007, so it's a long time ago. The hatred, especially from my Muslim brothers, is overwhelming sometimes, unfortunately. May Allah forgive them, and may Allah open their hearts and their minds to this. Sometimes it's just attack. I have been blamed, I have been accused of not being a Muslim anymore. So there have been, from that extreme to making dua against me and stuff like this. It has been a challenge. Some of the issues that I addressed, that I noticed nobody had addressed, especially when it came to female sexuality and their sexual desires, which is a major misunderstanding among the Muslim society. Is labeled shameless and had no haya or whatever. So from personal attacks to making dua against me to it has been a challenge. But there has also been a good, a lot of more support also from the sisters and somewhat from the brothers. I'm not attacking my brothers. I love them. It's just that we need more support from the brothers. And I'm also gonna say that, just like people say that there's a woman behind a successful man, I'm gonna say there's a man behind, a woman who's able to speak up. And I would have to give credit to my husband. Alhamdulillah, he had been very supportive. Some of the issues that I addressed, I know that it may have made him uncomfortable, but it never, like, he always put the need of the ummah before his personal, satisfaction or discomfort. And as long, so we need more men like that, inshallah, that, who are supportive. If I had to take some time away from the family, he was understanding. But then again, as I mentioned, there has to be a balance. There are times I had to say no to create that balance. And there were times when he had to accept the, lack of my presence in the family because of that balance. So yeah, just the family support, my husband's support, and just the like, no, I have to do this because this is what's needed. So yeah.
Inshallah, may Allah grant you ease and more success in the future. Inshallah. We do have more questions. I'm just wondering if you have the time to maybe another 3 questions actually.
Yeah, that's fine. Inshallah, I have time.
Okay, Bismillah. Okay, this is a bit of a somewhat of a tough one, I guess. Why don't we see any women prophets in history? Let me read. Can we say that we are the same but with different responsibilities when it comes to leadership positions? Because the men are having more having responsibility over the women, or is it leadership is generally not for women? There's one question of that.
See, I think the idea of the question perhaps generates from the idea of equality, which has been a very loaded term in our times. Equality does not mean justice, you know, and justice cannot be implemented by equality, because sometimes, you know, people have different roles, different needs, different physique, you know, different body type, different, you know, different things. One of my favorite, you know, it's like a Facebook meme. There are three people standing. One is a kid, one is a very short height, middle height, and then tall, and then there's fence, and they're trying to look on the other side, right? So the equality would be like that the 3 step stools are given, 1 to each, right? So the tall person who would have been able to see on the other side of the fence without the stool has just an added thing which he doesn't even need. But the shortest person with 1 stool, he's still not being able to see on the other side of the fence. So the shorter person needs 2 stools, the middle height person needs 1 stool, and the tall person doesn't need any stool, because in the end, the idea is to look on the other side of the fence, right? So the justice is how to get all 3 people to look on the other side of the fence, right? Now, when that justice needs to be served, the distribution cannot be equal, because equal distribution will not serve justice. Unequal distribution will actually serve justice. Keep that in mind when we look at certain rulings in Islam. Certain responsibilities are not put on women. For instance, we were talking about financial responsibility, which in a way does not force women to leave the house or to work. It's not a necessity. It's something, if she wants to do it, she can do it. Does that mean that working women are better than non-working women? No, it doesn't. It means, you know, one wants to do it, one doesn't want to do it. Similarly, the responsibility of being outside the house or physically straining themselves or going through the difficulty of, you know, of being physically tortured or all this stuff has not been put on women. And we see from the stories of the prophets that pretty much every single prophet went through physical difficulties, physical torture, humiliation. And you know, when he stepped out of the house and started preaching about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the message of Allah, Islam has protected women from all of that. It's how you perceive it. You know, anything can become negative, anything can become positive. I mean, when it's put in the right perspective. Does that mean that for the same action, men are rewarded more than women? Because as I said, you know, when I gave the example of the fence, of looking on the other side of the fence, the idea is everybody should be able to look at the game that's happening on the other side of the fence. In order to implement that, unequal distribution of the step stools is the right thing to do. As Muslims, the idea is to get to the Jannah and to get that reward in paradise. Afterlife is the end goal of every Muslim. Women can get to it without being prophets. Women can get to it without being, having the necessity of being into leadership positions. So why put yourself through all that when you can get all that reward, you know, by not having those difficult responsibilities upon yourself? Does that mean that men are better than women? Where does it say in Quran that men are better than women? It doesn't. The reward of the same action is equal, and that's the main goal. For the prayer, 5 daily prayers, the reward is equal. A woman might be getting more reward sitting at home or worshiping or taking care of the kids or whatever that she's doing than a man who's in a leadership position and, you know, messing up his job or responsibilities or not being honest to his responsibility. So we don't know. Keep in mind that in the end of the day, the idea are the rewarding points from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And both men and women have the equal reward for the same action. And I hope that answers that question.
Hey, thank you. Jazakallah khair. I think that's it's very well put. A number of people have asked similar questions to this, but I'll try to summarize it in one. Okay, as the issue of misogyny in our religion or in our cultures is a long-standing one, can you give examples of how it has been addressed in the past, and also is the current feminist perspective in our societies not the motivation behind much of these complaints or complaints issues?
So you want the specific example of misogynist treatment and how it has been dealt with in the past. If you're specifically looking from the time of the Prophet ﷺ, I don't know, on top of my head, I can give you the example of, I don't know if it was necessarily misogyny or not, but the rights of the woman and how they executed that where they might not have been allowed to is when the man came to a girl's father, he wanted to marry her. And the father said no without even consulting his daughter. So the daughter stepped up and she said, no, you know, I want to marry him. So that's the execution of her rights that Allah has given her, and for her to take a stand for herself. And I don't know, when the forced marriages, you know, to say no to the forced marriages, or to ask for the divorce if the woman was not happy in a marriage, you know, not necessarily making it an honor issue for the family's reputation or whatever. And these incidents may sound like, you know, stories of the past, but I tell you this, unfortunately, it still happens to this day on a very, very large scale in many, many Muslim countries. So these are not stories from the past, they're still happening. And as I said, I was actually touring a Muslim country, writing a book about it, unfortunately saw incidents happening where, unfortunately, women get killed in the name of honor, in the name of Islam, that it is, you know, it is allowed, it's okay and whatever, but it's not. And how it will obviously, on a communal level, it will take a lot more on our part to be a lot more vocal about it, not only in English, but in the local languages, especially where it's taking place. And also, you know, for the sisters to start taking a stand for themselves, because, you know, the society is not changed until the people in that society start demanding the change. And I forgot what was the second part of your question. Oh, it was something about feminism.
Yeah, let me, the current feminist perspective, is it not the motivation? Is it, yes, the question here means, is it not enough of a motivation, or is it a wrong motivation of sorts behind this?
The feminism, see, I kind of try to avoid labels and terms, because what happens is the labels always get hijacked. So feminism, the way it is right now, is not what, you know, probably motivated it to start. And then there we have Western feminism, we have mainstream feminism, we have, I don't know, Eastern feminism. There's so many types of feminism, I don't know which one to refer to. But by definition, if it is to stop the injustice that is happening on the woman, then yes, I'm all for it. But what calls injustice, you know, if a I don't know, if for instance, the amount of clothes a woman has to cover versus a man has to cover, is that an injustice? Like, how are we going to draw a line where we're going to define justice versus injustice, right? Even from a non-Muslim perspective, the body parts that a woman has to cover versus a man has to cover on the beach or outside or whatever, they're different. So again, from a feminist perspective,
everything has to be equal. From a Western non-Muslim feminist perspective, everything has to be equal. So no, we don't promote that. We don't agree with that. And we also don't agree on injustices towards women, all these manifestations of misogyny that I mentioned. None of that needs to happen. And we even, not only just for Muslims, if we see it happening among non-Muslims also, it's a part of our society. We have to raise awareness. We have to raise a voice against it. So, but what happens, again, these labels and these terms confuse people a lot. So what happens, these terms being thrown at each other's faces, unfortunately what happens is, for instance, people like me, like one of the challenges that you were asking about, people like me, when we are trying to speak against, you know, the injustices that are actually injustices happening on women, especially in the name of Islam, a lot of time, you know, men just say, oh, there's another feminist speaking on the rights of Islam. So they use the loaded term feminism to justify their misogyny in the name of Islam. And that causes confusion among people, because people who have not invested enough time or research, you know, reading about what's happening in the world, they don't understand. But when these terms get thrown here and there, then it's just really confusing for the larger population who are not as aware of what's happening. And this is my request, you know, please just stop using these terms. Really, we need to purify our intentions, and we need to come out from this whole, like, you know, egocentric, or, you know, I'm going to win the argument sort of thing, and really start caring for our religion and for the people. And you know, these terms, feminism, I don't know. As I said, I don't like using terms. I cannot say anything. A lot of times also, unfortunately, I was in actually Pakistan, and there were two groups. One wanted me to speak for the Women's March. One wanted me to speak against the Women's March. I don't know the agenda they have over there. I know there's a lot of misogyny in that culture. But what happens is that women who just want to be free, they just want to do, you know, live their life without any rules and regulations, they have stolen the cause. They have become, you know, the main woman marchers or whatever, you know, holding signs that we won't even agree with, that, you know, I don't want to warm up the food for my husband. And I'm just looking there, you know, I was just looking at those labels, and I'm like, there are women who are being killed in the name of Islam. That is the cause. Versus, you know, you don't want to get up and warm the food for your husband. That's really not even an issue in a woman's life, you know. So the causes get hijacked for people's personal uses or attention or whatever they want. I just hope that I answered your question.
I agree on that. I think it's typically it's a typical thing that happens regardless of the cause or the like you said, the labels that's being used, whether it be feminism, you know, number of causes. But okay, one last question, and this is an important one, so I do want to ask it. How to deal with a misogynistic father or brother? That's Christina asked that.
Really, it depends what part of world you're in, because in certain parts of the world, it may be very, very difficult. It could actually become life-threatening to take a stand for yourself. So it really depends, sister, which part of the world you're asking. Firstly and primarily, I'm going to ask you to, you know, make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, make dua for his help, make dua to give you the strength, the guidance, and, you know, the help, his mercy to help you through your difficult time. And then see what you can do in terms of getting yourself out of from that situation. Maybe use a family member's help. Maybe I don't know how receptive and open your brother or your father are. Sometimes they themselves don't know, to be honest. Sometimes they need a little bit of push, a gentle reminder, you know, even sometimes pleading from the sisters or the daughter's part for them to be able to see clearly. So you would have to be a lot more specific, you know, because there's so many things that can be done. Maybe write them a letter, maybe write them, you know, an email or something explaining your situation, that what is happening is not right. and then see how they receive that request from you. And or if it's a severe situation, you know, if it's something that, you know, you fear for your life, then I am going to encourage you to reach out to the law if you can, you know, and seek protection, because unfortunately things sometimes become really, really, you know, life-threatening for the woman in the family. So it really depends on your situation. If you need any more, you know, more help, feel free to privately message on my Facebook. Inshallah.
Okay. Jazakallah khair. Jazakallah khair, everyone, for your questions. Thank you so much, Sister Saba, for your time. This was, in fact, our longest session. We had quite a number of questions. I do want to answer them all. I apologize if I missed out a few because it's just quite a number of questions. And from my experience, alhamdulillah, the number of questions, the more it's a good, it means it's a good session because it's interactive and people want to talk and people want to ask and people are engaged. Alhamdulillah. On that note, you mentioned you can people can contact you via Facebook if there's any. If you have any. So how do people get in touch with you?
The Saba Syed is my Facebook. I think people can see my face, and then they can just direct DM me their question, and it will take time for me to answer. Just be patient, but inshallah, you know, I will. Yeah,
all right. Once again, Sister Saba. Brothers and sisters, my dear participants, thank you so much for your questions and thank you so much for viewing this session today. Unfortunately, we have to conclude this it's been quite a long session. If you missed the video, don't worry. It will be on our Facebook and on our YouTube, Muslim Circle O on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, right? So please do like, share, and subscribe. And join us again tomorrow, same time, same place, virtual, wherever you are, where tomorrow we will have Dr. Haifa Yunus talking about, her topic is entitled, one second, and your Lord said, call upon me and I will answer. So with that, Jazakallah khair, everyone. Thank you so much. And see you tomorrow, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum.